everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let's get ready for a lot of books and a lot of banter. As I am fairly new to BookTube, I thought one of the best ways to get to know me and get to know the kind of books that I liked was to do a reading update. In this video, I'm going to go over all of the books that I've read so far this year, what my goals were at the beginning of the year, and I've liked. So let's just get into it. Now, first thing I will talk about is my goals. So I don't really set high reading goals for myself. The past couple of years, I have tried to set a goal of 50 and I've hit about 30 every single year. So this year, instead of setting myself up for failure, I set myself up for success and I set a goal for myself to read 30 books. And so far I have read 21 books, which I think is fabulous for someone who is a mood reader and someone who can sometimes be a slow reader. I have quite a lot of books here to talk about. There is more, and I also have read quite a few audiobooks, which I've been really into audiobooks this year because my attention span is gone. I think I literally have the attention span of a newborn puppy. So at least I'm cute. Okay, so I thought I would break this reading update down by my first reads of the year to my most recent reads, and I will kind of talk about each book, what I thought of it, what I liked, just give you a basic rundown, and then if you want to see any in-depth reviews, let me know. The first book I read this year was an audiobook, and it was a novella, and it is The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alix E. Harrow. And surprisingly, this is the only thing I have read by Alix E. Harrow, but I have heard such amazing things, and after listening to The Six Deaths of the Saint, I can understand why. This was a beautiful novella. It's a very short audiobook. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars because I thought it was fantastic, and the narrator was also incredible. The Six Deaths of the Saint, God, what a freaking tongue twister. The Six Deaths of the Saint, the Saint of War continues to spare a servant girl's life so that she can continue to fulfill her kingdom's destiny. It just is like such a short but very powerful and impactful novella, and again, the audiobook was fantastic. And I saw news the other day that Alix E. Harrow is actually expanding or writing a new, I think it's either expanding upon The Six Deaths of the Saint, but it's going to be a little bit different, or it's like a longer book sort of inspired by that short story, and she's working on that now, so that is really exciting news. The second book that I read this year was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Now, if you know me, you know I love V.E. Schwab, and I can't believe it took me so long to read Vicious. I actually read this as part of my MFA program. I got to pick my reading list, and it was my first semester, so I picked Vicious so I could kind of look at the portrayal of morally gray characters, because if you have read this book, you know that this is all about morally gray characters, and I think that this is also a really good beginner fantasy book if you're not huge into fantasy, but you kind of like the ideas of superheroes, supervillains. I think for fans of the show Loki would find this really interesting. It does kind of give comic book vibes or graphic novel vibes, and it was just really incredible. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. I have Vengeful, the second book, on my never-ending TBR, but this is really good. I would recommend this for sure. But switching gears a little bit to a different genre, I read a historical fiction book, and it is, I think it's historical fiction. Yeah. A historical fiction book called Hamnet by Maggie. Again, I read this for my first semester of my MFA program because my so my MFA program, let me roll it back. I am currently getting my MFA in creative writing. I want to publish a book. And in my first semester, I was working on my work in progress that I had been writing for a little while, and it was very Shakespeare-inspired. So I decided to put Hamnet on my reading list because this is sort of loosely inspired by Shakespeare's wife and the loss of their son named Hamnet, who will then go on to inspire the writing of Hamlet, which is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. So I picked this up and I absolutely loved this. I think if you're a historical fiction fan, if you're a Shakespeare fan, you're absolutely just gonna eat this up. It was so good and the writing was literally incredible, and it was so interesting that it followed the life of Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, rather than actually being centered around Shakespeare. I thought that was very interesting, and honestly, I think I gave this 5 stars as well because I really loved it and I really enjoyed it, and so I highly recommend. Now, big time switching gears to a romantasy book, I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I'm a big Ali Hazelwood fan. I don't love all of her books, but I will read just about everything that she comes out with because I'm a loyal customer and I'm a loyal fan. Sip of coffee. Okay, so Bride is basically for the Twilight fans. I feel like vampires and werewolves are really in their comeback season recently. Was this the best book I have ever read? No, but did I eat up every second of it? Absolutely yes. I'm pretty sure I gave this 5 stars purely because I was so entertained and I devoured it in 24 hours. I got it in the mail, sat on the floor, and just read the entire thing start to finish. And it was what I needed to kind of revive myself because, let me see. Yeah, I finished this in February. So I had gone through a little bit of a reading slump between January and February. I read this at the end of February and it kind of revived my soul a little bit. And it's very much vampires versus werewolves and it's very steamy and it's a paranormal romance. I would go as far to say if you are a romance lover, if you're an Ali Hazelwood lover, but you're not a fantasy girl, I feel like this is a good intro for contemporary romance lovers into the romantasy fantasy realm. Next thing I finished was another audiobook. It was a young adult fantasy. It was Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. Now, I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I thought it was really well done. I think had I actually physically read the book, I might have had a different experience because I did feel at certain points it was a little bit slower paced. So to have the audiobook and the narrator constantly propelling me forward definitely helped that slower pacedness that I did feel throughout the book. However, for young adult fantasy, I really enjoyed it. It's a sapphic inspired, twisted Cinderella tale, and I'm a big fairy tale lover. I will eat up anything fairy tale inspired. Let me get myself together here. Okay, the next book that I read was actually, I listened to it on audiobook, but it was Most Ardently by Gabe Novoa. Now, this is a Pride and Prejudice remix. Another thing about me is I love anything Jane Austen. My name is Emma, just in case you didn't know that. And my mother is a huge Austen fan, and she did in fact name me after Emma, the Jane Austen character, the book, Emma. So yeah, so I really enjoyed Most Ardently. I loved the audiobook. The narrator was fabulous. It was just I thought it was a really, really well done remix. This is very much Pride and Prejudice. It's very much the plot line, except where you would find Elizabeth Bennet, you have actually Oliver Bennet. So I felt like Gabe Novoa did a really good job of keeping the integrity of the original story intact while also adding his own spin to the tale. Obviously, it is a remix, so there going to be differences. I think that there were also I mean, in a story like this, for a remix for what it was, I think we should make room for some modern allowances and interpretations. The whole point of this was to show more representation in classic stories. But I really thought it was fantastic, and I fell in love with Oliver and Darcy's romance. I thought it was incredible, and again, if you have a chance to listen to the audiobook, I also highly recommend because it was so good. The next one is probably one of my favorite books that I have read this year. Again, I listened to it on audiobook because I was on a huge audiobook kick, and it is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. If you have not read this, you need to. It is a young adult, I'd say magical realism. I'd maybe put it in the fantasy category, but it is so incredible. I actually think we should go as far to say we should be teaching this in schools because it is such a really interesting exploration of what monsters are in society, and it was so wonderful. And the narrator for this audiobook was so good. I gave this 5 stars. Again, it's fairly short. I would highly recommend this book. I literally have nothing bad to say about it. Okay, the next book I read was I also listened to this on audiobook. The audiobook was also very well done. Highly recommend. It is a young adult fantasy. It's called Dragonfruit by Makiia, Lucier. And this was just wonderful, honestly. The issue with it was that it was marketed as a young adult romantasy. And I would say that there is romance, but it's not really quite developed enough, in my personal opinion, to be considered a romantasy. I also have mixed feelings about the romantasy genre in general. I would say that this is a young adult fantasy. It is I read this during Pacific Islander month, and it quickly became one of my favorite fantasies that I've read so far this year. I absolutely loved the setting. It takes place on this like beautiful island. There is a very tropical setting, and I feel like with a lot of fantasy books we're somewhere in the Middle Ages, and this was just refreshing to be somewhere new with a really good cast of characters, and there are dragons. If you are itching for a dragon fantasy book, this was really incredible. All right, next book that I read was an actual physical book this time. It was Just for the Summer by Ali Jimenez. Now, this, funnily enough, was my first Ali Jimenez book that I have read this year, and it has since spiraled. Quite a few Ali Jimenez books are on my reading list for this year. Just for the Summer made me absolutely sob. So it does follow a woman named Emma, and I felt like she has just like a lot of mommy issues, and she's grappling with a lot of sort of unresolved family trauma, and it really struck a chord. And Justin is perfect, and I loved their relationship and watching it grow and watching them sort of go through things, and I just loved it so much. I thought it was so good. And Ali Jimenez, I have found, has this wonderful way of portraying real life problems or things that people sort of struggle with, and putting it in a really, like, you would think fluffy romance, but it ends up like being so incredibly therapeutic to read her books, for me anyways, but they're also so heartwarming, and by the end you feel like you've just like gone through a therapy session and you're getting a giant hug. And I absolutely loved this. I kind of wish I had waited to read this, because this is part of Your World series. You don't have to read them all in order, but I kind of wish that I had started with the first one. Young adult fantasy. Now, when I switched back to audiobook mode, and I listened to the Sunbear Trials by Aiden Thomas, another fantastic audiobook, and a really fantastic young adult fantasy, if you ask me. If you're a fan of Hunger Games and a fan of Percy Jackson, this is like, if those two series had a baby, it would be the Sunbear Trials. It was so good. So good. It is queer. It is a Mexican-inspired fantasy. I thought the world building was extremely well done, and we got to travel to a lot of different places within this world, and I felt like every place was very unique and stood apart from one another, which I think is very rare sometimes when a character is traveling to different places. All of the places kind of end up melding together, but Aiden Thomas does a really good job of making every place unique, and which is so realistic, because when you go from town to town, sometimes, like, yes, there are similarities, but or state to state or country to country, there's always going to be differences within the people, within the customs, with the culture. So I really enjoyed this. Now, this happens to be one of my least favorite books that I've read this year. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It was just eh. And it is by my girl Ali Hazelwood. It was Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. This is very much like a secret, forbidden office romance. And to be honest, I think this is for people who like spice, which I do like spice. That wasn't like a dig. I think this is for people who like more spice and less romance. Which, again, there's nothing wrong with, but for me personally, to get into those, like, sort of physical connections, I really need some emotional connection. I prefer it, and I feel like that was the point of this book, so I'm basically complaining about the point of this book. But I think this one just wasn't for me personally. Again, like I said in the beginning when I talked about Bride, I read basically everything. Ali Hazelwood could put, I don't know, I don't even know, she could put out an alien romance, I'd read it. She could put out a friggin', I don't even know. I will read basically anything Ali Hazelwood. So I gave it a try. Wasn't my favorite, and it wasn't bad. It had a lot of the similar Ali Hazelwood quirks that I enjoy. We were back into a science-y sort of setting. But yeah, it just wasn't my favorite. It was very sexy though. Very sexy. Oh, okay. The next book, I jumped to a fabulous, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book that also ended up being one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. And it is Akwaeke by, oh gosh, I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing. I believe it's Vaishnavi Patel, but if I'm mispronouncing that, please let me know. This is a stunning book. This is a wonderful feminist retelling of the Hindu epic of Ramayana, and it follows the sort of villainized female character from that epic, Akwaeke, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely stunning. I have no complaints. This is 5 stars. It was brilliant, and I believe this author has another book that I am itching to get my hands on because I just want to read it, because I was a little nervous because it's long. She's a little bit thicker, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a hard time getting through it. No, it was just beautiful. Next, I read my first Julie Soto. This is an adult romance, Not Another Love Song. Again, this is my first book that I have read by this author. It was a sort of rivals to lovers musician edition, and was it the best book that I've ever read? No, but I did really enjoy it. I think I gave it 3.75 to 4 stars. I think that there were some things that I could have done without. I hate miscommunication. I hate a miscommunication trope. I don't know why. I just don't like miscommunication. It really irks me, and that's definitely the point of it, but it irks me to the point where I'm like I want to throw this at the wall. However, it was very good. It was very enjoyable, I should say. I don't really have anything terrible to say about it. I breezed through it, got through it quick. It's spicy. Next up, we are back to a little audiobook novella. So I listened to Galatea, I don't know how to pronounce it, by Madeline Miller, who has written The Song of Achilles and Circe. I read this for my second semester of my MFA program. I also read Akwaeke for my second semester of my MFA program because I began a new work in progress. And from some of these books, I feel like you'll get the vibe of the work in progress and what it is. Galatea is a sort of feminist retelling of the mythological character of Galatea. Listening to it was absolutely stunning. Listening to it, I feel like Madeline Miller's writing in general is very descriptive, very lyrical, a lot of imagery, and so to hear that out loud with a very wonderful narrator, just like, oh, it was a very immersive experience. A very short audiobook. If you love Circe and Song of Achilles, I highly recommend just giving it a listen, like on one of your little hot girl walks. And interestingly enough, I hadn't read any of Madeline Miller's books before this, so this was sort of my first taste, my little preview, because then right afterwards I read Circe by Madeline Miller. I can't believe it took me so long to actually read this book. I believe I have a YouTube short that kind of discusses my full review of this. I also have a YouTube short of my review of Akwaeke E. Of course, with shorts, you only get 60 seconds. So if you're looking for a little bit more of an in-depth review, you can head to my TikTok. I have more thoughts and feelings than just 60 seconds. But Circe, fabulous. 5 stars. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should. It's a feminist retelling of the many myths that Circe is in, and it paints her in a really nice, it was just wonderful. Oh gosh, I just like don't know. It tackles the Odyssey, which I feel like is such a hard thing to tackle, because I've read the Odyssey, I think supposedly like 2-ish times in my lifetime, and I still can't tell you anything that happened in it, other than there's a guy named Odysseus, and like the Trojan War. That's like basically literally all I know. This was just wonderful. This was wonderful. This was beautiful. This was powerful. It was emotional. It tackles a lot of really, really amazing themes. And I think, you know, Madeline Miller is just, this is her genre. You know what I mean? I feel like she hasn't come out with a book in a while. I haven't read Song of Achilles, so that's definitely up next. We have Part of Your World by Ali Jimenez. I kind of started at the beginning and I read Part of Your World and gave it 5 stars really quick. It was so enjoyable. It was so lovely. Actually, it says on here I gave it 4 stars, but it's in between. We'll just say 4.75. I don't know why I gave it 4 stars. I loved it. I love Ali Jimenez. I think that this was a really amazing book. And again, I am always just so enthralled by Ali Jimenez's ability to tackle some really serious themes, but in a very light-hearted romance. And for this one in particular, again, I actually have a review up of this on my YouTube shorts, a longer form one on my TikTok, that kind of goes through my full thoughts on it. But I will say, trigger warning for this, it does tackle some more serious themes like relationship abuse, domestic abuse, some family trauma, but Ali Jimenez does it in such a wonderful way. I just really, I don't know, I just love it, okay? It was just so good. I loved Alexis and Daniel. I thought that they were incredible, and I honest to God thought no one could beat them. I actually, reading this after Justin and Emma, I was like, no one's gonna beat Justin and Emma, and then I was like, okay, no, but they beat Justin and Emma, so I don't know. Next book I read, we're almost to the end. The Davenports by Crystal Marquis. This is a young adult historical fiction that takes place in the 1900s in Chicago. Yeah, I think so. And it's inspired by the real life story of C.R. Patterson and his family. And this is just like, if you like Bridgerton or Downton Abbey or a period piece in general, you're just gonna love this. I think this is actually is on the older end of young adult, older side for young adult. All of the characters I believe are like 17, 18, so I feel like it could fit into new adult as well. And it also tackles some more mature themes like marriage. I enjoy this. I don't read a ton of historical fiction, and this was my first young adult historical fiction. And it did not disappoint. I really loved it. And I believe the second one is coming out in November, and I pre-ordered it because I was so excited about it. All right, the next book I think is in my car, but it is Yours Truly by Ali Jimenez, which is the second book in the Part of Your World series. And Yours Truly, I didn't think anyone could beat Alexis and Daniel, and then all of a sudden we have Brianna and Jacob. Okay, I loved yours truly. I gave this one 5 stars. And I'm gonna tell you why. I have anxiety, right? And I haven't read a lot of books with characters with an anxiety representation in the book. And Jacob has anxiety. And I have never felt so seen in a character before. And a lot of the stuff, his like internal monologues and his thoughts and his feelings, like I understand them so well. And specifically ones like when it comes to relationships and like talking to people and interacting with people, I just was like, I felt so seen by him and by this relationship. And it was just so, oh my God, if you are an anxiety person, you have anxiety, you should absolutely pick this book up, because it was so good. So good. I actually cried. I cried during that book, and it was just, yeah, it's fabulous. I highly recommend. Highly recommend. I gave that one 5 stars. Yay! We are on my last book that I've read this year. It was an audiobook, and it was Funny Story by Emily Henry. I put off reading this book for some reason, and then I actually sold my copy that I had purchased because I was like, I'm not going to read it. And then I was looking for a really easy audiobook to listen to, so I was like, you know what? Frick, I'll just listen to Funny Story. And I used to be, okay, so let me talk about Emily Henry for a second. Used to be a really big fan when I first started reading romance. It's not that I dislike her now. I just think the more books that I read from her, the more they all sort of tend to melt together. And Ali Hazelwood is very similar, but there's something about Ali Hazelwood that it's kind of quirky that I just keep going back for more. Emily Henry is just like, I know what I'm gonna get. And there's no quirkiness. There's just like, it's just like, I feel like everybody is kind of like, book lovers and beach read are basically the same book. My story, I didn't have high hopes, but I really thought the audiobook was really well done. The only thing is, this is my first time really listening to like a romance on audiobook, and I will say that I cringed quite a few times. And I think reading things is way better than listening to them out loud. So I will say that detracted from my experience, but again, I think that's just me. That could just be me. But the narrator overall did a really, really good job. I also thought, you know, the romance was good. I liked it. I think that it could have been shorter. We could have gotten to the point more. I also felt like the characters, again, just seemed, I wasn't in love with them. I wasn't in love with the characters. I thought they were kind of boring. I think maybe the beauty of Emily Henry is that none of these people are like wild and crazy. But for me, I just felt like they didn't really have a personality. I hate it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good audiobook. I ate it up really quickly. I think with a romance, you eat those things up quick. I think Emily Henry just announced that she's a new title for her book. It'll probably take me months to also read it, but I'll read it eventually, just because I like to be included. I like to feel like I know what the kids are talking about. And that's it. And that is it. That is the end of the video. We have made it to the end of my reading update for this year. I still have quite a few books that I want to get through and I want to read. At the moment, I am listening to Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Now, this is my first T. Kingfisher experience. I wanted something. Yesterday was really rainy and like windy, and today it's also rainy and gloomy and windy, and I wanted something sort of like moody. But I'd love for you to let me know your top 3 favorite books that you have read this year, and if you've read any of the books that I have read this year, let me know if you like them, or let me know if you didn't like them. So thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. That would mean the world to me. It's so fun to actually sit down and be able to talk. And if you're interested in watching any of those reviews that I was talking about, you can follow me over on TikTok. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.